Pastor Amanda has been in ministry for over 25 years, and through her local and international ministries has reached thousands of people with the message and mission of hope. Amanda's heart is to see people grow in the character of Christ and bring reformation and cultural change as never seen before in previous generations. She's also very passionate for the marketplace. She is known as a fiery preacher and has seen God move powerfully in her meetings, confirming the word with signs, wonders, and miracles. She's loved for her humor. Amanda's commitment is to the local church and to build with pastors, helping them to fulfill their God-given destiny and purpose for their cities. Her passionate purpose is to see the local church established, grow, and build with the kingdom mentality as believers walk in the supernatural naturally.
I'd love to introduce to you an amazing woman. She's an apostle with her husband Rick. They live in England, although she is an Australian. She is, not only that, she's a fantastic friend. But what I love about Bev is that she has a leadership quality on her life that honestly I have only seen in very few. And those are some of the very big names that we know. And so Bev has so much to share, and I've asked her to share something quite particular tonight because we've been chatting, Bev and I, about leadership and how to grow, why churches don't grow, and so, or even businesses don't grow, and Bev has amazing insight. So Bev, welcome tonight. I'm going to leave it over to you tonight. You can do the rest of the introduction and just carry on if you like.
Thank you. Great to be with you guys. I appreciate being asked again. I'm starting to feel like an old friend to everybody, especially because I know some of you on Facebook now. So thank you for inviting me, Amanda, and I'm really blessed about that. I wanted to talk today about growing as a leader and the relationship that has to growing the thing that you're leading. And, there's a couple of scriptures that relate to this specifically, and, there's actually quite a lot of them, but the ones that mean something to me are the one in Exodus 18, verse 21, where God's telling Moses that he needs to delegate his leadership authority to other people. And what he does, he talks to him about the fact that he needs to delegate to some people who are able to deal with 10 other people, and some people are able to deal with 50 other people, and some people are able to deal with hundreds of other people or even thousands of other people. And that shows me that everybody's got a different capacity and leadership call on their life as to how many people they can lead. And we are in a very celebrity culture, very celebrity conscious culture, in which we always think that the person whose name you see all the time and the person whose preaching you listen to all the time or whose business that you hear about all the time is going to be the most important person. And I really object to that because I do believe that it's got a lot to do with call. And being able to lead the most people doesn't mean to say you're the best leader or even that you're the best person or even that you're the best Christian. It just means that you're called as a leader of, for example, of thousands. But somebody that's called as a leader of tens has an equal stance before the Lord. They just have a different calling. And the other scripture that relates to that is the one in Matthew chapter 25 about the talents and about how a master was going away somewhere and he called 3 of his servants and he gave one of them 5 talents and one of them 2 talents and one of them 1 talent. And then he left them. And it says that he gave those talents according to their ability. It didn't mean according to the fact that he liked the one with the 5 talents more. It's just that he could see the one with the 5 talents had an ability to cope with more and varied things to do than, say, the person with the 2 talents. And actually, even though the story talks about the fact that the person with the 1 talent went away and buried it, that doesn't mean that a person with 5 talents mightn't go away and bury it, or a person with 2 talents mightn't go away and bury it, because it isn't about the number of talents, although the number of, the amount that you're given does tend to dictate what you're able to cope with. But more what it says, what that particular scripture talks about, is how the guy with the one talent saw God. And maybe he saw God from a perspective that the king only gave him one talent, and so he felt like he wasn't as favoured as the other two, and so that automatically put him on a track where he became embittered and angry and wasn't willing to use the one thing that he had. But I always consider myself to be a one talent person. My one talent is that I can speak. And, you know, I asked the Lord to give me wisdom, and he gave me wisdom. But if he hadn't given me wisdom, I still could speak. But what it would mean is I'd talk a whole lot of nonsense, and people wouldn't want to listen to me. But the fact that God has anointed me for leadership, and he's also given me wisdom because I keep asking for it, means that even though I've only got one talent, it's a talent that's well used. I haven't buried it because I'm not resentful at all the other things that I can't do. And so I think that's a really big thing for us to get a handle on, that we need to take what we do have and use that, rather than feel I should have more, I deserve more, why wasn't I given more, or why don't the people in my organization or in my church or in my neighborhood understand that I'm capable of more of this? Why don't they get me to do this? Why are they getting those people to do the preaching or to have to run that conference or whatever? And often it's because we haven't actually worked with what we have got. Because my understanding is, this is my own little parable, but it's the reward for work well done is more work. And so actually, if you take what you've got and use that effectively, God will give you more to do. And not only God, but also the people that you're working with and the people that you're working for. And so that's a bit of a preamble. But the point that I want to put across is that we grow in leadership. We grow in leadership, whether it's in business, whether it's in ministry, whatever context it's in, we grow in leadership. We're not born capable of leading what we grow to be capable of leading, what we become capable of leading. We're not born able to lead what we become capable of leading. And that then infers to all of us who think about it, that infers that we have to become something. It's a stage, it's a process, it's a glory to glory thing. And so whatever we're leading right now is according to our capacity to lead. And whatever our organization or our church or business grows to is according to our ability to work with the thing that we've been given to work with. People often fool themselves that they're stuck away in a little place with a few people or a small organization to lead, and that if we were given a better opportunity, we would do better. If they put us up on that preaching platform, or if they gave us $500,000 to work with immediately, we'd be fine. We would be able to run that. But actually, you can't grow. You can't start with a Matchbox toy and then go immediately to a Ferrari. You have to actually work your way up through the cars or through the business or through your capacity to lead. And you draw according to your capacity to draw. And then you hold according to your capacity to hold those people. When I was living in Australia a lot of years ago, 20 years ago, possibly 25, I was quite young in ministry. We had a very small church, and I was really desperate for somebody to help me understand what on earth we were doing and how we could do it better and how I could grow and all the rest of it. And I think, too, that I had in my own heart a feeling that we were meant for more than this 50 people or 100 people that we had. And that if somebody just gave us more, we'd be able to do a good job. And you know, I found it a bit difficult to understand why God wasn't giving us more people. But the thing was that God was growing us. And I remember there was a lady that I looked up to. She was quite a good preacher, and she did a lot of the women's events at the time. And I thought she was so beautiful and so tall and all that. And you can tell by me saying that I'm not very tall. I'm only 5 foot, so, you know. She looked amazing. And I just thought she was just awesome. And she and her husband had been given a church. in a suburb, one of the outer suburbs of Sydney, that had been run by an evangelist. His name was Gordon Gibbs, if any of you remember him. And he'd passed his church over to this couple, and the church at that time was pretty well one of the major churches in Australia at that point of time. And I think it had about 1,500 people. It had been led by an evangelist who was also a very good leader. And so he passed it over to this particular couple, and the woman is the one that I was referring to. And gradually what happened was it very slowly began to lose people, just very slowly. So it went down from 1,500 to 1,400 to 1,350, etc. And in the process of the few years that couple was leading the church, the guy ended up sick because of burnout. And so the old pastor came in and took it back on again, and this couple had a bit of a sabbatical and they had some time out. And then after that, by that time they had joined another organisation, and it was actually the AOG. And they were given a different church in the same area, and the church was a church of 50 people. Now, they'd been leading a church of over 1,000, and now they had a 50-people church. And I'd met with this woman 2 or 3 times over the years to relate, and this last time I met with her, she now had this very small church in comparison with the church that she used to have. And I will never forget the conversation I had with her. She said to me, "Bev, we are not 50 people leaders. We're leaders of thousands, and we should be in a bigger church. All our vision and all the things that we're aiming at, they can only be carried out by a bigger church. They can't be carried out by a 50-people church. And so we're in the wrong church, and this is the wrong thing." And it was one of those times when God gives you an epiphany and you really understand something in the spirit. Because when I heard her say it, I understood that actually, if they were bigger church people, they would have been able to take that 50 people and make it 1,000. But because they weren't big church people, even though they'd been given, well over 1,000 people, they were in the process of growing it down to the size that they could cope with. And it caused them to burn out as well, because they were not able to cope with that many people. And so when they got put into their 50-people church and it stayed 50 people, that was because that was really about the level that they could cope with. And the fact that they had been in a position of being a good right-hand man to the guy who'd originally been leading the church and who grew it that much bigger did not mean that they had the capacity to lead a church like that themselves. Wow. It only meant that they had the capacity to assist somebody who was doing it. But when it came to their own senior leadership ability, they did not have what it took to lead much more than 50 people, because actually their 50 people kept going up to 60, 65, and then down to 40, and then up to 45, then 50. That was their level. And another example of that is when we first came to England, we did a course with the people that we had, and we had 45 people in the church when we first came to it. And we did a course with those people, and part of the course talked about the Ascension Ministry giftings, which are the gifting of apostle, prophet, pastor, evangelist, and teacher. And we were also doing the gifts of the Spirit, and we were doing gifts of the Father, and it was quite a lot to do in this particular book. But I remember there was this one guy in the church, and he was a fairly ineffective man, but he was a good man, and he was a godly man, and he was a sensible man. And he had wanted to lead the church, but the church had not voted him in. And I remember when he filled out all these forms that we were doing as we were trying to work out the giftings and callings on the people in our church, he filled out that particular page about whether you might be an apostle or a prophet or a pastor or an evangelist or teacher, and he ticked every one of the boxes. In other words, he felt that he was all 5 of those things. Well, to my understanding, the only person who's all 5 up till now has been Jesus, but this guy felt that he also was all 5. And so when we did our interview with him afterwards to talk through the results of his book, I remember saying to him, Gerald, why have you ticked all of these boxes, being apostle, prophet, pastor, evangelist, and teacher? And he said, well, it's because I am all of those things. And I said to him, Gerald, if you were all of those things, the people would be following you. Even if you were one of those things, even if you were a pastor, even if you're an evangelist, even if you were a teacher, the people would be following you. Why are they not following you if you're all those things? And he said, well, I am all those things, but the people wouldn't let me lead. And, you know, it was pretty hard to really know what to say to the guy, because a leader doesn't need to be given permission to lead. The thing that's unique about a leader is that they lead. And the way that you know you're a leader, as John Maxwell says, if you look over your shoulder and there are people following you, that's how you know you're a leader. So you may decide you're a leader, and you may go to Bible college and study to become a leader and do degrees and all sorts of things. But if nobody's following you, you're not a leader. And that was the case in this guy's situation. He felt that the church wouldn't let him lead, but he was all 5 of the gifts. In actual fact, he was absolutely kidding himself, because he wasn't any of those gifts, and he was having himself on. So the point that I'm putting across here, the level of your call, or the level of the maturity of your call, is shown by what you can draw, by the people that you can draw, or the opportunities that you can draw, if we're talking about business, by what you can draw to you, and then what you can hold once you've drawn it. Because some people can draw them but not hold them. And there are others who can hold them, but they have to work a lot harder at drawing them. But that will establish the maturity of your call. I remember hearing about somebody who visited Frank Houston's church in the 80s, and he was shown around the whole site of that great big church by one of the associate pastors. And he said, the guy said, man, what I would do if I had a church and a facility like this. And the pastor that was showing him around said, the only way you would ever get a church like this if you were prepared to pay the cost of getting it. And I think people don't really understand how much it costs emotionally and spiritually and in terms of maturity to be able to grow big enough to grow a big thing. Let me just say that again. What it costs us in terms of emotional maturity and wisdom and understanding to be able to grow big enough within ourselves to grow something that is big, to grow strong enough within ourselves to grow something that is strong. And where people often feel like their great gifts of preaching or ministry or leading aren't recognized, and if they got the opportunities that other luckier people got, they would be better. But actually, believe it or not, God gifts people according to their abilities to be able to draw and to be able to hold. It doesn't mean he likes those other people better. It means that A, it's about calling, but B, it means about our willingness within ourselves to run the gauntlet. And many times what happens is somebody doesn't ask us to do something that we feel like we deserve to do, and we get our knickers in a knot and we get resentful and we go home and we don't play that game anymore. But actually, if you could stay the course and think, okay, I'm going to accept that, and I'm going to keep working, I'm going to keep looking to God to raise me up, and I'm not going to get out of the game just because I've become offended. In fact, I'm not going to be offended, and I'm not going to let rejection dictate my life. All of us have rejection. Rejection's been with us since the Garden of Eden. But we don't have to live out of rejection. And people who are constantly getting offended and who are constantly aborting the process that they're part of because they got offended are people who never actually are able to finish the course, because they're always pulling out and starting something else because they feel that they're not valued in that place. But if you're looking to the Lord and you stay focused on what it is that you're supposed to be doing, God himself will be responsible for raising you up. It's never the case not being allowed to lead, because leadership at its most basic is influence. And if I don't have the influence to draw people, and somebody gave me a group of people, I would lose them. A person will grow an organization or a business up or down to the degree of their own leadership capacity. We have a church in North Carolina, and we were over there a couple of months ago, and we heard about another church from them up the road, and the other church was failing, and so it was selling off a lot of their stuff. But I was absolutely intrigued by the story, because the story was a building that was really too small for a church, and he started a school in it. And he also bought a very large block of land on which they were going to build their mega church when they had their mega church. Well, in the ensuing time, the property prices in America have cut at least in half. So the land that was bought for over $1 million is now worth less than $500,000. The school's closed down. The building isn't big enough to have a church, and they're trying to get rid of all their stuff. The reason for that was because that guy had not yet grown to the capacity as a leader of a church to know what to do with $2 million. So what he'd done was what he saw other people do when they got further on down the track. People who'd earned their leadership, who'd earned the sorts of offerings that were being given, and who were buying their buildings and setting up their buildings based on the fact that as leaders they'd grown to that capacity. They were buying buildings and buying land, and this guy thought that he could shortcut that whole process and just go and buy the building and start the school and do all the rest of it without within himself having grown to it. So he and the millionaire both were unwise in what they did, because the person hadn't grown to develop $2 million worth of wisdom about what you do when you're a church, and that's what you're wanting. And so influence can always be used for good or evil. And in terms of capacity for influence, Hitler was a great leader. I mean, he was a terrible man, but he was a great leader. John Kennedy was a great leader. Maggie Thatcher was a great leader. It doesn't matter whether you are looking at, it's not about their policies, and it's not about the direction they led people. But if we're just talking in terms of how many people we are able to influence, those people have amazing influence. Angela Merkel right now, I don't know whether you guys know much about what's happening in European politics, but Angela Merkel is the Chancellor of Germany, which is basically the Prime Minister of Germany, or the President. And she is doing an amazing job right now when Europe is in an economic crisis. She's leading, she's got amazing influence, but I'm sure she didn't have that when she started out in politics. So leaders are influencers, and the greater the leadership gift and capacity and anointing, and by that I mean the more that gifting has matured, the better caliber the people that leader will lead, and also the more people that they'll lead. And one of the ways that Rick and I judge whether somebody's leadership gifting is maturing is not just by how many more people they're drawing, but the better caliber of people that they're drawing. Because when you first start leading anything, you're drawing a few people and you're just a little bit ahead of them, and they've got their issues and you've got your issues, and you're just trying to work it all out as you go on. But the more mature a leader gets, the better caliber of person that they draw in. So that's when they draw in other people with strong leadership giftings who are going to follow and serve them and put their giftings into the leaders' giftings. That's when you draw the millionaires and the wealthy people. That's when the more mature your own gifting gets, the more mature the people who follow you become. Now, you'll always have the less mature ones because they're starting at the beginning. But this is the time when you begin to see somebody who's set up a church, for example, or a business, let's say a business, somebody who's set up a business, and first of all, they've got their girlfriend working for them and their mother working for them and the lady down the street eventually. But then after a while, they've got a really good accountant who works for them, and they've got a really good marketing manager, and they've got people that have got all sorts of degrees, because the leader themselves has grown to the ability where they need high caliber people, and because they need them, they can draw them. And that happens in churches. You wouldn't get you wouldn't get somebody the caliber of Joseph in the Bible if Pharaoh wasn't already leading a great big thing in the country of Egypt. You know, if he wasn't leading something great, he wouldn't have needed somebody great like Joseph. And yet, if you notice, Joseph was always only ever a second man. He was never the main man. He was the second man. And so there is that within us to understand that the reason we get better people is because we become better people ourselves. We become better leaders. And because we're better leaders, we get better caliber followers. And so what you lead is up to you, your maturity, your willingness to continue to grow. But the other thing that's involved in that is also your call. And this is something that people don't really want to hear so much. Some people are called as pioneers. That means they start something off. Now, especially in a church context, pioneers don't necessarily end up to be the leaders of the mega churches unless God changes their call partway through, which he definitely did with Brian Hoos, and he definitely did with Phil Pringle and maybe with other people. But when people are carving something out of nothing, they actually tend to be people who want the challenge of making something out of nothing. And so pioneers are less likely to lead huge things, because what they want to do is start something where nothing that was there before. Whereas inheritors can take what they inherit from the pioneer and then they can grow it. And it's like, you know, Blackson, Lawson and Wentworth, you know, cut this great road through the Blue Mountains, and it was a dirt track all the way through. But now there's a 4-lane highway up there because other people have come and improved on what the pioneers started off with. And that's what inheritors are for. Some people are called to start something, other people are called to inherit. It's two different giftings. And if you're one, you know, don't stress because you're not the other, because unless, you know, you could ask the Lord to help that change. But really, inheritors take what they've been given and then they grow it. And so it gets less clear here because our culture is very strongly geared toward bigger is better, and the top person is the best person. But actually, I think we all know leaders who are top person. Anybody with any sense can look at them and think they might be the top person, but they're not the best person. And actually, you can look and think what they've grown out of their leadership gifting, and now they're leading in their own strengths, and they're no longer leading well or effectively. And so that's often because that person wanted to stay in position when actually they should have moved aside and let somebody inherit it from them. But because there's so much kudos and so much celebrity attached to being the top person, they're getting their identity out of their leadership. So they've let go of the anointing in order to keep the role. And God's calling them to go on to something else, but they're not willing to let it go. So we're all called and equipped according to God's design, and we're all gifted with the talents and abilities and gift mixes and skill sets that God wanted for the work that he wanted us to do. Now Noah was given timber and pitch for his ministry. Solomon and also Aaron, the high priest that was with Moses, they were both given gold and silver and precious stones. All Nehemiah was given was burned, broken stones. Joseph was never the top man. Pharaoh, he had more influence in Egypt than Pharaoh did, but he was never actually the top man. Daniel was never the top man. He had huge power and influence, but he was never the top guy. And if you think about, if Noah had thought to himself, I don't want timber and pitch, I don't want to use this is just a some basic material, I want gold and silver and precious stones. If he'd have built the ark with gold and silver and precious stones, it would have sunk. And Nehemiah had built the wall with gold and silver and precious stones instead of burned stones. The very people he was trying to keep out would have just absolutely overrun them and conquered them because they're trying to get this beautiful wall. We're all given the giftings we have because God already pre-designed us. It says that in Ephesians 3:10, where his workmanship created in Christ for good works that he prepared beforehand for us to do. And he prepared for Nehemiah to be a person who could build a wall with old broken stones. And that's what he was given. He couldn't have, if he had been given timber and pitch, the wall could have been burned down. And I'm saying that in talking about our own abilities for business or for ministry, that there is within us something that wants somebody else's giftings, but actually we've all been uniquely designed in order to be able to do the thing that God prepared beforehand for us to do. And rather than waste emotional energy wishing that we had something else or were something else, we need to actually look to the Lord, find out what it is that we are and that we have, and find out what it is that he wants us to do with that in terms of business and all the rest. I've had a lot of talks with Amanda, and I've got a real heart for business, and I'd really like to get into it. But in many ways, I'm seeing more and more clearly that God has called me to study. I'm just about done with this master's degree in leadership. I know I'm called to talk about leadership, and I know I'm called as a mentor to leaders. And that's, if I ever do business, and I really want to do business, but if I ever do it, it'll be a secondary thing, because the thing that God called me is to use voice to speak into people's lives and use my experience and use the understanding that he's given me, which means I'm never going to run a mega church. And even though we've planted a lot of churches, many churches, and we've raised up and established many leaders, we already put to the Lord a long time ago that our call is to raise people who can stand on our ceiling as a platform, that we can help people become gold, that God will give to us people that we can help, that people will know better than they will ever know us. And that was something that we had to come to terms with. This is our call. And if we try to do something outside our call because of this celebrity fame consciousness thing that is really attacking the church right now, the person that we won't be pleasing is God. No matter who else, runs our fan club for us, God won't be part of it. And we just feel like the most important person to have in your fan club is God. If you haven't got God, it doesn't matter who else you've got. So that's a really important thing for us to understand. And I'm coming back to my main point here. What you lead will continue to grow as you continue to grow. Emotionally is wisdom, experience, spiritually, and it will stop growing when you stop growing. The thing that you're building cannot get beyond you. The leader always will keep the thing that they're leading at their own level. And so if the level of the thing you're building is frustrating you, it's about you growing and you developing, and also time and patience and all the rest of that. That's a really big thing. So for us, for Rick and I, our call is to raise up leaders, fix broken leaders, raise up churches and ministries and fix broken ones. We've never inherited anything. We've passed on, and we've passed on to inheritors when we finished our parts. And that's the salient point here. You have to know when the time is to finish and the time is to hand it on, because that's why a lot of churches and organizations hit their peak and begin to go down, because the person in charge isn't willing to give up their identity. So the 2 points are, it's the leader's responsibility to grow if they want what they're leading to grow. And the other thing is to understand that we have specific calls for a specific season of time. And we need to recognize our call, and we need to recognize our season. Because if we're determined that our vision can only come to pass through me, we'll end up like the church Rick saw and related with the pastor a few months ago. 4 old people in a fantastic building. I mean, the building and the property were amazing. And I had 4 people, and they were all over 75. Because when the time came to pass it, and that's much more common in England than it is in Australia, or in New Zealand. But when the time came to pass it on, they couldn't pass it. And so that's a really key point in whatever it is that we're building and establishing, not only to know your call and know your role in it and be willing to grow and change and get mature and get emotionally mature and all of it, but actually when the time is coming that God is asking you to put that thing down or pass it on, that you actually understand that time and be willing to go through a good transition process. And actually the next book I'm going to write is about recognizing transition and how to go through it. David was a great warrior who longed to build a temple for God, but as it turned out, it wasn't his call to do that. He was called as a warrior. And if you read the chapter in Chronicles chapter 29, it says that because God had said to him, no, you're a warrior, you're a man of war. And even though he was a man of worship, God said to him, I don't want you to build my temple, but I'm going to let your son build the temple. And in 1 Chronicles 29, it talks about how David, he'd get upset and take his cart and horse home and think, oh, well, stuff you then. If you're not going to let me build it, I'm not going to play. What he actually did was he contributed huge amounts of money to it. He got his mates to contribute money and gold and silver and all that. He rings up King Hiram down the road that's got all the timber, and he arranges for him to do a deal with Solomon so that Solomon's got all the timber. And he makes sure that the temple is built, because the issue really, we have to have something in our heart that says it doesn't matter who gets the credit. It only matters that the purposes of God are brought to pass, whether through your business or through your church. And sometimes it's just a bummer that the warrior isn't allowed to build the temple, but the pioneer can't settle back and get comfortable. Sometimes it's a bummer that the pioneer can't settle back and get comfortable in the thing that they carved out of the bare ground. You know who you are, know what you are, know what you're called to. If the church or the organisation has become complacent and not responding to encouragement to grow, the leaders got to ask themselves if they've become complacent or if it's time for them to go. If they've lost vision, are they fearful of letting it go? And when Miriam got leprosy, the Bible says that the whole 12 tribes of Israel had to wait for her until she got better. And sometimes that's the thing that happens with organisations. Everybody has to stop and wait till the leader actually decides to work through the issues of their life. So that's my main point. A lot of people are waiting, they're going through their life waiting for the real thing to happen, and they feel like they're marking time waiting for the real thing. But actually where you are now is the real thing. And how you are dealing with it is the real thing. And what is happening is the real thing. And if you don't actually know what I'm doing now is the thing that's real, you won't be able to go any further. What God intends can only happen through what you're doing now, through the things that you're dealing with, the problems that keep rising against you, the people that rise against you, the issues that keep happening, patterns in your life that you have to keep dealing with. As you deal with those things, everything leads to everything else. And so I'm just going to finish with this scripture. It's in Jeremiah chapter 29, and it's verse 4 and 7. And God is talking to the people that he carried away to Babylon, and they were in Jerusalem, and their lives are, in a real tough state, and they've been carried away captive to Babylon, but they feel like they shouldn't have to go there. They feel like they shouldn't be in this position. But God says to them in verse 4 of chapter 29 that he says, I want you to build houses, and I want you to live in them in that place. I want you to plant gardens and eat that produce. I want you to take wives and have sons and daughters and give your daughters in marriage. I want you to multiply in the place that you're in. And actually, let me just say this. If you can't multiply in the place that you're in, you're not going to multiply anywhere. There's not a better place. You've got to actually, all of us have to learn how to multiply in the situation that we are now in, rather than struggle and scream and try to get out of it. And the last verse says, but seek the welfare of the city or the place where I have sent you into exile, or where I've placed you, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, because in its welfare you'll find your welfare, or in its peace you will find your peace. And so what you're doing now is the real deal. If you can multiply where you are and pray that place through and pray that situation through, as it gets its peace, you will get yours. So
Wow. No, that was awesome, Bev. I've got a couple of questions, but I want to ask if anybody's got any questions, please don't hesitate to ask and put them down, write them down, or just write why, and I will unmute you so you can ask Bev. Bev, how does a leader know? I know that God speaks to them, but are there signs that the time is right for a transition to an inheritor? I mean, I know that God speaks to them, but how do we know? Are there other signs that accompany that?
Well, I'll tell you, for me, the major basic signs, and that is when a leader is beginning to get bored with what they're doing and irritated with what they're doing and feel like frustrated with it and frustrated over small things and just, basically like, oh my gosh, that is a sign that they've lost vision for that place and they should be asking the Lord where they should be going and how to pass that thing over. For me, that is the bottom line. And many times I've seen people who get like that. They're bored and irritated and irritable and all the rest of it, and they try harder to do better, to read their Bible more, to pray more, to put in new programs and start something new and get something different and, sack their staff and get more staff or whatever it is. But in actual fact, the Lord's saying, you've built this thing, now it's time for you to pass it on to somebody else because you're a builder. Some people are people who establish foundations or fix broken foundations, and I know that because that's Rick and me. And if you don't respond to that, you become a very boring, stressed leader and no vision, and the people become bored too. If the people in the church are bored, it's because the leader is boring. If the leader's boring, it's because they're bored as well. So yes, I feel like that is the basic thing.
Wow, that's very good, because I can. I've been in that situation. I've been there myself, and I've also been in situations where I've seen that in pastors. And you think, as someone in the congregation, you think it's me. I shouldn't be bored, etc., etc. That it's good to know. Now, something else I want to ask you, Bev, and it's something that we were talking about the other day, and I wanted to remind you to speak about it. It's the circle thing, and you'll know what I mean by the circle thing because I think it's fantastic for everybody to hear. Can you explain that?
Yes. I'm not the world's best drawer anyway, and so therefore it wouldn't help if I was showing it to you. But if you imagine a circle,
we'll draw the circle.
The circle is a dot, a small circle, a dot. And that is you. That's your life or your organization. And the dot in the center is really the central part, or the thing that you're focused, the thing that your whole life or your whole organization focuses around. And that's okay. We all need that to happen. We all need something that's our baseline. But then, as happens with everybody and every organization and every life and every church, there comes a time of shaking. Now, the shaking might be a divorce. It might be a business going down, going broke. It might be the children left home. It could be, the church split, or it could be you left the church and you moved somewhere else, or anything that makes your whole life shake and makes you feel like you've been destabilized. And what happens to that dot in the center is that it moves toward the outside of the circle. It's still in the circle, but it moves up, most of the way across, and it's just on the inside of the circle. When the shaking's over, when we get over our depression because of the divorce, or we get over the failure feeling because our business went down, what people normally try to do is claw their way back to their old center. They want that. Really, what we feel normal is what normal used to be. And so we try to claw our way back to what my old normal was. And in the process of that, everything actually tends to get a lot worse. Because what God's doing in our lives, when that shaking happens and the center moved to somewhere further on over in the circle, is that what God wants us to do is that the whole circle moves over so that that little dot is again the center of our life. Rather than try to move the dot back to the center, we should be moving the whole circle over to make that changed dot the center again. So what that actually means is, when your life has changed because of those circumstances, don't try to make it what it used to be. Recovery isn't making it what it used to be. Recovery is finding your new center and beginning to work out from there. It may be that a business failed, and after a while you get courage and strength again to start another business. It may be that a marriage failed, and after a while you get courage and strength to know that you can live on your own, and even though you've been betrayed, you know, you can go forward, because your identity doesn't come from who you're married to, it comes from who you are in Christ. Or you left your church, or you moved, or whatever else happened. And so it's quite a simple thing, really, but it's basically when the shaking comes and the center of your existence moves, don't try to get it back again to where it used to be, but allow your whole life to shift so that the new center becomes your new place of strength, so that you can go on from there.
I just love that. Veronica has actually asked a question, and Fiona's got something in here too. So I'll ask it for you, seeing as you're not here, you're on Skype. How do you know when you're at full capacity level as a leader and be content with it?
When you stop getting vision for something else. The thing about it is that, I'm going to go back to the celebrity thing. There is something in us, in all of us, definitely in me, it's in all of us, that wants to be important and wants to be seen by other people. And a lot of times people have gone into ministry or senior roles because God's called them to, but then they get seduced by this need to be seen and acknowledged and all the rest of it. And that's, that's normal. It's common to all of us. But if you're at the end of yourself and there's a lot of stress in your life and you're not really getting more vision, but you can't say no to people because they need you to do it, and you're trying to fulfill everybody's needs, and you get home on a consistent basis. I don't mean occasionally, but you get home on a consistent basis and you're drained and you're exhausted and you're overeating because you're just trying to sort of, somehow do something for yourself and all the rest of it. You actually need to know that there's something wrong in the way you're leading. It may not mean that you've reached your leadership capacity. It may mean you have to put some things down in order to keep going forward to other things. And women leaders particularly will tend to just take more and more and more on. It's like we've been shopping, we're carrying a whole load of bags and boxes and all that, and then somebody else comes and says, oh, here's another box, and we say, okay, put it on the top. Here's another box, put it on the top. And we end up, we can't even see, we've got so many boxes and bags. But actually, you may not have reached your leadership fullness capacity, but it may be that you need, in fact, not maybe, it will be, that you need to write down everything you do and then find out, look at it and say, what would you least want to put down? What could you not bear to put down? So when you look at all what you couldn't bear to put down, look at the rest of it that you didn't think you couldn't bear to put down, but you feel like you have to do it because you're responsible, and actually ask the Lord for ways to get rid of those other things so that you can continue in your leadership growth. It's hard really to say, this is how you know you've reached the fullness of your leadership, because the fullness of your leadership doesn't mean you go higher and higher and you look after more and more people or bigger and bigger organizations, although it can mean that. Because you may stretch out further and further widthways instead of height. I wouldn't want to say there's a way of knowing that you've reached your fullness of your leadership, because I don't think, if we're in Christ, that we ever actually do reach the fullness of our leadership. But say, for example, you run a home meeting, for example, and you've got 10 people in it, but you do so well that the home meeting divides, and then you've got 2, and you do so well that it divides again. What they may do is put you in charge of the home meeting leaders. So therefore, then you may have another 10, but they're leaders. They're not a home meeting group. Now they're leaders. Then you may be put in charge of all the, the home meetings do so well. You get put in, you get to be the lead pastor of all the other pastors or the counseling pastor. So it might not mean that you're ever the first man, so to speak. You might never be the senior pastor of the church, for example, or the general manager of the business, but actually that your responsibilities grow as you grow. But the biggest point that I want to say to you is, every time you're starting to get to feeling like you're choking because you've got so much on, make a list of everything you can do, mark out things you couldn't bear to let go of, and then work out ways to get rid of the rest so that you can enable yourself to do a really good job at what you actually are doing and give room for more to be given to you because you've actually cleared space for that to happen rather than just try and take more and more on. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I love that. I think I was just doing that with one person the other day, and I think that is powerful. Now, going back, Bev, just a little bit, Fiona has mentioned something here, and I think it's a valid point, and see if you can expand on it. She said, so the transition that lots of churches are going through at the moment, and we know that, you and I have talked personally about the transitions. Many churches are being shaken, lots of things are happening. Is God moving the dot, and some churches are trying to keep it in place or get back to where it was? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. That, Fiona, that's such a great point, because God always moves on, and every time the church has reached a real high, it feels like this is all God's ever going to do. We have now reached the pinnacle. He couldn't do any better than this.
Yeah.
And so when churches are thinking like that, or leaders are thinking like that, and right now we've got a whole generation of leaders who are so sold out on the celebrity status of the big deal pastor, they do not know that actually even already at this point, that thing is starting to be corroded from inside. And God is moving on. Churches are certainly in the UK, are becoming far more relational. I don't know if you've noticed this, but a lot of younger people are like, I am sick and tired of the slick thing. I want relationship. I want authentic. I don't want it to be so darn perfect that, and I want it to be, I want to have relationships. And so they're going, some of them, into smaller churches. That's been going for a while now in the UK. And from what I understand, it's just beginning in Australia and New Zealand, that younger people are starting to say, I don't want to be at a mega church. But because mega church has been our model for the past 25 years, the model of excellence that everybody's supposed to try and attain to, people are feeling like, well, for a start, what happens is a lot of senior leaders, rather than let go when God's asking them to let go, are hanging on to the detriment of their own health, to the detriment of their own moral status. Keep seeing people go down morally, that it's just gutting, or they're burning out, or they're keeping their church and their church is marking time, but nothing much is happening within the church. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting that you said the transition's happening there, because definitely over here, or it seems to me everywhere I look, leaders are being changed in churches, and churches are changing in what they look like, etc. So yeah, I really feel that churches are, God is moving. The thing they're centered around, and the thing that they've based their whole modus operandi on, and the thing that they based their whole ethos on, which was good for its season, and it was right, and it was God. But now God's saying, okay, that was great. Now we're going to go on to the next thing. Because people lack the vision to be able to see that there is a next thing after the excellent thing that they think that they built. What's happening is, a lot of churches are imploding and a lot of leaders are imploding, when actually all that's required of is to be willing to give up their not just their status, but also their security in things being like they are, and let God move them on to the next thing.
That's brilliant. Fiona's just said something else, but just before she says, I say this with sort of fear and trembling, but do you think that particularly in many Pentecostal churches, particularly, or charismatic Pentecostal, the revival mentality is that if we can get a revival of some sort going, then God's going to grow the church, has actually been the detriment of leadership, because we're not seeing good leaders. We're not seeing leaders grow in a capacity. We're actually all believing that this somehow ethereal revival is all that's going to need to grow the church. And it's actually causing people to feel like, well, I don't see it, so what's the point of sticking around? And really we're not seeing good leadership capacity grow.
Yeah, I agree with that. The thing is, I'm a Pentecostal through and through. And so, you know, I love the Lord, I love Pentecost, and I love Pentecostal churches.
Yeah.
But I do feel like that whole thing about revival, when revival comes, nobody can say it's not there. And revival isn't great music and big crowds and fantastic, slick presentations. Revival is when people fall on their faces before God, and wherever they go, you know, they take the fragrance of Christ, and people are profoundly impacted. It's a supernatural thing, and there have been, I mean, we've seen bits of it here and there, definitely. We've seen bits of it, but we've only seen bits of it. And calling something a revival doesn't make it a revival. And I think that's actually the problem, that some people, many churches are feeling like if they say we're having revival enough, and if they've got enough people, and if the presentation is as amazing as it possibly can be, that will be constituted as revival. No, revival is when the nation changes, because the purposes of God have been birthed through the church into the nation. It's a time when people, including church people, fall on their face and repent. And when people just begin to pour themselves out in a fervor for God that affects the entire nation. So, yes, I do think that saying something is revival doesn't make it revival. And that's why people get disillusioned. And after they just say, you know what, this is same old, and they feel like, they many times feel like that sort of pastor or that sort of church or that sort of Christian is lying, because or in denial. That's a better way of saying that. They're in denial because actually they're not allowing themselves to see what is, because they're so busy with this mantra that we have revival. And so people that are of the ilk that want a bit of authenticity. I mean, I speak in faith with the best of it. You know, I do. And my whole Speak Life book is about living in faith and speaking in faith. But it's one thing to speak in faith. It's another thing to be in denial. And I think that what's being said about revival many times in the churches is denial, is living in denial, and it is making people who want a more authentic Christian experience walk away from church and think, actually, this is just not for me. These people listed.
Absolutely. You know, Fiona said, absolutely, young people are sick of churches not being real and relational. And I think what you just said there was fantastic, Bev, because people are walking away from church, young and old, and saying, this is not for me. And I have said before that it's not that they're lacking faith, but they've lost their hope. And I think that's one of the biggest things, you know, because they're not just backslidden and going to hell. It's that they've lost hope.
Yeah, and I agree with that, absolutely. And you can't, and faith is the substance of things hoped for. Yeah. So if hope isn't there, faith doesn't have a leg to stand on. Yeah,
very true. And Veronica's just written, yes, I love what you're saying. I'm getting excited in my spirit, yippee. And I think it's absolutely vital. It's been fantastic, Bev. Dawn has said, here in New Zealand, we know of many house groups because of all the things you are saying. Thank you, Bev, for your honesty. And I think that's been the problem too. What do you say about that, Bev, just very quickly? House groups are starting up, and I know my mentality has always been they're wrong. But right now, I'm seeing it from a different paradigm of what you're saying here. What do you think of that?
Well, I would have once upon a time said that house groups were wrong, and that the reason for that is because we've all been enculturized by our leaders to think that house groups are wrong and independent and all that. But actually, you know, the more, I mean, you know, as you know, we lead a church which is several hundred people, and we've got all the churches around. So we are sold on the idea of church. Having said that, I have been to a few conferences, and I've read some stuff that's been written by some really key guys in America and in England about the fact that the house church movement has merit. And actual fact, it would do the mega churches and the larger churches a lot of good to help support the house church movement. And even though in some ways we seem diametrically opposed, the issue really is, Jesus says, when two or more gather together, I'm there in the midst. And provided the house church, the thing that's wrong, or that we've perceived to be wrong with the house church movement, and which I do believe is wrong, is when people get so sick and tired of church and angry and resentful and unforgiving, and they go and think, oh, I'm going to start my own church and I'm never going to church again anymore and I'm sick of church. And they started a house church under those, with those attitudes. That church will die. It will end up fighting itself, and it will die. It won't grow. But when people actually just in a mature way look at being in big church and just conclude to themselves, you know what, this just isn't for me at the moment. I want to do something smaller. I want to do something more intimate. I want to know people a bit better, and I don't want all the razzmatazz that goes with the big machine. And they genuinely just start something in their room that has got some other people coming, and they're studying the Bible, and they're praying, and they're loving the Lord, and they're loving their neighbours, and they're loving the big church, and they're not speaking badly about the church down the road or the pastor down the road, and they're not fellowshipping around all their hurts and their resentments, but they're fellowshipping around the fact that they love the Lord. Well, then I believe that's just as much church as any other way. And secondly, and this is even more relevant, if it turns out, when we've had bird flu, we've had swine flu, we've had mad cow disease, and we've had, Asian flu and all sorts of different things, if we ever come to a point, and we will probably come to a point, where people are not able to go into large public gatherings, and right now in British government, they're actually discussing this thing. If we ever get to a point where there's an outbreak of some sort of contagious disease, which says that people are not allowed to meet together in large gatherings, if we don't have house churches worked out, we actually won't be able to go to church. You know, it has to be that we're not so prejudiced against house churches in our mind, because if it ever comes to a point, and it might because of persecution, it might because of, for the people who don't agree with house churches, what do they think about the house churches in persecuted nations where they have to meet secretly, like in China? You know, we do not know when the Western world might be in the situation that it actually needs to very quickly organise the logistics of being able to meet in small groups in homes. There's that side of it too.
Boy, I had never thought of that, but it's so true because of the way that the world is at the moment. It could happen.
Yeah, anything could happen. The dot has moved as far as the whole world's concerned, and definitely as far as the West is concerned. And we need to, rather than lament because it's not like it used to be, we actually need to let ourselves recenter around the new dot where God has replaced that dot, and work out how to live from this point rather than try and get back to how we used to live.
That's so true. Mel's just written, house churches actually allow for the fivefold and development of spiritual gifts a lot better.
Right.
Yeah. And in some ways they do, I guess.
They do. You don't, put it this way, you don't generally have an apostle in a house church. Probably, you might have a pastoral type, you might have an evangelistic type. There tends to be levels of those giftings, so you might have a local evangelist, you might have a regional evangelist or a national evangelist. But if somebody like that was in a house church, if somebody that God was calling as an apostle, for example, well, they might operate their apostolic leadership. It might develop, as in they started this house church, and then another house church wanted to align with them, and somebody else did, and somebody else did. And in the end, they're an apostolic leader 1,000 house churches. You know, I mean, we don't know how that would all work. Or they might be an evangelist that just goes around the different house churches and people how to get people saved. You know, it exactly what you said. It all works, but you don't necessarily have. You know, it's unlikely to have your own house churches that's got even one or two of those large Ascension Ministry giftings that are there. But the reason is those Ascension Ministry giftings are there to equip all of the saints, and so therefore they tend to be. You wouldn't find President Obama, for example. He's not a good example, but you know, you wouldn't find the Prime Minister of Australia running the local government in Camden. That's the point.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it's just, I think we're all going through a paradigm shift with leadership at this point, and God's really doing that. You know, we are, the circle's moved, or the dots moved, and now we've got to work out how to align with it.
Yeah, when the dot moves, the whole circle's got to work out how to move as well.
Yeah, and I think that is what's happening at the moment. Bev, it's been absolutely brilliant, and I just want to tell everybody tonight to buy Bev's book. It's called Speak Life. I've actually said that I want it part of PPP, and so I want everybody to read it. And where can they buy it from, Bev? And just give a little bit of an overview of it.
They can get it from, might have to order it. Coorong's being a bit stubborn about getting it in, even though a lot of them have been ordered. But it's called Speak Life and Shut the Hell Up. Understanding that hell, you know, if you do speak life, you have the power to shut hell up operating in your life. And you can get it from Coorong. You know, you can order it from Coorong. I think you can order it from Amazon. And there are, I heard a little while ago that Dimmock's had it as well. But, you know, I'm not so sure in Australia, but I know that if at the last resort you can't get it, I can send it to you. But I'd really love it if you got it from there, because that would let the powers that be in the bookshops there know that people want the book.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So if everyone can try and get it, I'm going to actually get some in the next coming weeks, and I'll hold some here as well for you, so that you can buy it here from me as well. But I will be trying to get it through, like Bev just said, Coorong particularly, because I know what they can be like to you know, some authors. So Bev, we just want to thank you so much for coming on tonight. You've been an inspiration as usual, and absolutely amazing. I just love what you say about leadership. I always get so much out of it, and I know everybody else has. So thank you again, and we just want to bless you and say have an awesome day. As we go to bed, you'll be starting, so have some great meetings today.
Hey, thanks, ladies. You know what? I love it, Amanda. Thanks, everybody, for listening.